Welcome to episode 85 of the Headspace and Timing podcast. I wanted to give you a quick reminder, there's some changes coming at the beginning of the new year. Headspace and Timing will be shifting to its own podcast feed in your podcast player of choice. You'll have to subscribe to the show again wherever you find your podcast. It'll continue to be available at veteranmentalhealth.com, but we're making some changes. Along with this, we'll be making other changes. One thing that will not change is the discussion about how to change the way we think and talk about mental health. On today's episode, I talked to Army veteran Christopher Molaro. Chris is not a mental health professional, but he has built a company that is supporting mental health professionals and veterans through technological applications.
There truly is nothing to be ashamed about when you struggle with anxiety or when you're feeling depressed. Moreover, and the most tragic thing is that these different struggles and these illnesses don't have to be life sentences. They don't have to last forever. You don't have to always struggle with them. Now, it may take work in truly getting better, but there's evidence-based therapies and there's a ton of dedicated professionals that are committed to getting patients to feel better and to develop a certain level of resiliency.
Welcome to the Change Your POV podcast network. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes about veteran mental health. My name's Dwayne France, and I'm a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. After I retired from the Army, I took on a new mission as a clinical mental health counselor for my fellow service members. If you served in any branch of the military, you're familiar with the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal. It's one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing wasn't set right, however, it was just a huge useless chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing isn't set correctly either. That's my goal with this show, to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week, we'll talk with mental health professionals, veterans, and those who support veterans, service members, and their families. We're going to have real and honest conversations about a topic that most just don't like to talk about, veteran mental health. Let's jump into this week's conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Headspace and Timing podcast. Once again, and as always, we really appreciate you taking the time to listen and learn more about veteran mental health. Today's guest is someone that's doing things a little differently in accessing mental health and wellness for veterans and service members. He is a veteran himself, but he's got a new way of looking at and sort of dealing with mental health concerns with his company Neuroflow. So I'd like to welcome to the show today Christopher Molaro. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi Dwayne, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, certainly. It's glad that with all the busyness, which we'll get into a little later about how Neuroflow is making the impact, to be able to take the time and sort of spread the word, it's great. Before we get into Neuroflow, I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Like you said, I'm an Army veteran. I served for 5 years after commissioning as an officer in the field artillery. Man, being in the artillery was probably one of the funnest jobs I could have ever asked for. And the greatest honor of my life to this date has been the opportunity to lead a platoon of soldiers. I was in the 1st Cavalry Division during my platoon leader years. We deployed to Iraq in 2011 in support of the combat operations over there. And, in that realm, so I have a bachelor's degree in engineering from West Point, and, you hit on it a little bit of, veterans reinventing themselves earlier. I don't think I've reinvented myself at all. I mean, I'm doing something different in regards to applying my skill set to helping make an impact in mental health. But I'm not a mental health expert. I mean, you're more of an expert than I am, certainly, 100%. I don't have a healthcare background, but I am a problem solver and a leader, which is two attributes that I learned and developed through military service. I'm just applying those attributes to now solving problems and helping be a part of the solution in the mental health arena. So I know how to build a team around me and hopefully surround myself with people that are much smarter and have a deeper level of expertise than I do on my team. And together, as a unit and now as a company, we can try to solve and tackle these really tough problems.
No, that's really great. The idea of you haven't reinvented yourself, but not a lot of individuals will leave the military and get into the mental health space. How did that come about for you to start addressing sort of, the invisible wounds and figuring out the technological solution to some of these experiences about how combat changes veterans?
Yeah, I think it happened the way a lot of us come across the things that we end up doing is because we see a problem that is personal to us, whether we're affected by it or we see friends or family members that are affected by it. And I'm not talking about just mental health, but anything. You figure any invention that's out there, most of them came about because that person had a problem with whatever their invention ended up solving. So in particular for mental health, it's kind of unique because anyone listening to this show, if they're honest with themselves, either they've been affected by mental health personally. I mean, we all go through bouts of depression or have anxious moments, even if you're not diagnosed with those illnesses. But if you've been fortunate enough or resilient enough to not have gone through that, you certainly 100% know someone that's close to you that has. So all of us, you, me, all your listeners, have been affected one way or another by mental health. And we, so then being in the Army, after 280 combat missions, there are a lot of soldiers, myself included, were anxious, maybe had symptoms of PTSD or depression, and those were really never talked about. I mean, you said it best, those invisible injuries. Yet we had our back pain treated for, and if we needed knee surgery, we got that. And if you had a dislocated shoulder, you went to physical therapy. And so you had all these physical health injuries, these physical wounds being taken care of, but never the mental health aspect of things. And what's really encouraging, though, is more than ever, the medical community is understanding and acknowledging, and I think people are finally starting to make it part of the conversation, in that mental health affects the physical health component of things, and vice versa. I mean, if you just look at the statistics, if someone is diagnosed with depression, they're 3 times as likely, just by the numbers. I mean, if you look at the people diagnosed with depression, they're 3 times as likely to have a chronic pain diagnosis or to be on an opioid prescription. I mean, you can't make those numbers up. And so I think what it shows us is evidence that the physical health component affects the mental health and vice versa. And so I personally had soldiers, and I knew friends of mine that were getting their physical health taken care of. They were also diagnosed or identified as being a candidate to benefit from seeing a therapist or a psychologist or something like that. And so that's really great news. I mean, just to be identified and to get that, to have those resources extended to you. And then in particular, I was at Fort Hood down in Texas, and Fort Hood had a place called the Resiliency Center. The Resiliency Center was this world-class facility. I mean, it was one of the best mental health facilities that the Army had to offer. And so you have all these resources, which is really great, but they're only good if you actually go and take care of them. And, I personally knew folks that ended up being diagnosed with depression, and tragically, we hear the number all the time that 20 veterans a day commit suicide. So that number is terrible and tragic. But what number is not more public is then all the soldiers that struggle with suicide ideations or self-medicate with painkillers or alcohol and just kind of go in this downward spiral. and Dwayne, I want to highlight one thing. Obviously, I mean that we're both veterans, and the veteran community is very special to me, and I want to help solve this problem so that my brothers and sisters don't have to struggle with this anymore, and that they can go on doing the great things that they've already done for our nation. But this obviously isn't just a veteran issue. Millions and millions and millions of Americans a year have this, have these issues, and too many times the mental health aspect of health gets kind of swiped aside. I mean, if you just look at the numbers themselves, so if you look at the 54 million Americans that have either depression or anxiety, 80% of them will see a primary care provider in the course of the next year, but won't go see a behavioral health specialist. That's 80% of the people that need the help are seen by a doctor, but don't go see a mental health doctor. I mean, that's a broken system. Access to care is not where it needs to be. And so, anyway, long story short, as a leader in the Army and just as a problem solver and wanting to be a part of something bigger than myself, I saw this as a huge issue, obviously. And when I transitioned out of the Army, I didn't want to just go get another corporate job somewhere, but I wanted to continue to serve in my own way and to try to make a little bit of an impact. And that's what led me to being trying to be an innovator in the mental health field.
And there's as you said, there's a lot of different things there, but definitely the idea of the barriers to care. The resilient centers and the world-class mental health centers. Yes, they're great, but if they're empty, they're not effective, right? And that's a lot of the challenge is, there is still that, how do veterans not access services? But also there's an issue about what the community thinks. And I guess there's sort of this idea that, mental health hasn't changed since the early 1900s, where it's just some guy with a goatee and you're on a couch talking about your mother, right? And that's sort of the image that veterans certainly, but that the community has in their mind. I was actually at a legislative event this past Friday talking to one of the state senators here in Colorado, and he had said, man, I sure wish there was more science behind this mental health stuff so we could understand it. And I almost fell out of my chair.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's, especially now with, in the last 25 years, really now with neuroimaging and what we know about the function of the brain, we've taken leaps forward into understanding the neurological and the biological basis. And you said earlier about how, physical health is tied to mental health, but, these things make physical changes to our brain, just as like, muscular atrophy in my hand when I ignored, carpal tunnel for 20 years. The same kind of thing will happen to the structures of our brain, and therefore it's biological and psychological at the same time. And that's a lot of what Neuroflow is trying to focus is on the utilizing the new science of mental health and using what we know to enhance therapy. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, Neuroflow has two platforms. Engage BH is used by behavioral health specialists. So, there's a lot of talking about science behind a lot of this stuff. There's evidence-based therapies out there that have been proven over the last few decades in terms of being really effective. So, and in terms of kind of restructuring the way that patients cope with these different illnesses and thoughts, and identifying the physical component of those things. So if you look at something like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT is very effective for helping anxiety and depression. Obviously not effective for everyone, but everyone is a little bit different. But for the most part, there's a ton of research and evidence that's been well funded over the last few decades that shows that it really is effective. Now, again, it's only effective if the patient is engaged with the activities and the kind of the exercises that they're supposed to do throughout the course of that treatment. And so Engage BH is a digital platform that connects the patient and their counselor or therapist or psychologist, behavioral health specialist, in between appointments so that they can practice their new skills and their assessments. We keep them engaged and motivate them. And we do bring in the physical health, the physiology of it. So you said it very well. When you get stressed or you're anxious or you're relaxed, your body physiologically changes itself. Your heart rate changes and your brain waves change in very precise manners that we can measure. And so using the Engage BH platform, and we integrate with wearable devices like heart rate monitors, we can actually measure your body's physiological response to a therapy exercise or a mindfulness exercise. So you can see objectively how your body is reacting to that, and you can measure on on an empirical scale how stressed you are and how relaxed you are in real time. We take it a step further, and we have another platform called Integrate Health. And this is really exciting because payers are now getting behind it as well. And the payers understand that, okay, this isn't only the right thing to do, and it's not only going to lead to better outcomes, but mental health patients are also more expensive to the health system and to themselves. So the payers are now reimbursing primary care doctors and psychiatrists, anyone that can prescribe medication for involving and integrating therapy behavioral health specialists into their workflow and their practices. So our platform, Integrate Health, takes the physical health component, the primary care, the pain management, the medications behind psychiatry, and we integrate in a more seamless, automated fashion this therapy workflow. So, Dwayne, if you were if you were doing therapy with me as a behavioral health specialist, and I was also seeing my primary care provider, we try to connect you to integrate the both of you so that the PCP is not operating in the dark. They know how my therapy is going, how my behavioral health treatment is going, and vice versa. You can remotely understand how I'm physiologically responding. You could understand how I'm engaging. Am I even compliant? Am I doing the exercises that I should be doing? And we bring it full circle in that way. So to be very clear, we're not trying to replace any therapists or the doctors or anything. In fact, we couldn't do what we do without you. We view ourselves as a tool to enhance your workflow so that you could be more effective in your mission. But it's something that's very exciting at this time.
Yeah, and I see the benefit of that. I typically see a client once a week, maybe twice a week, for an hour. Maybe there's a group thrown in there as well, so maybe at the most 3 hours for a typical outpatient. I mean, that's actually over and above what most people will see a therapist or a mental health professional outside of a more intense or an inpatient system. We see them about an hour a week, and we talk about what we're working on, or talk about what's going on, and then it's high five and I'll see you next week kind of thing. And then there's a whole lot of hours in between the hour one week and the hour the next week. And and that's one thing of Neuroflow sort of bridging that gap. And it's like going to a personal trainer once a week doesn't do any good if you don't apply what the personal trainer has you do in the other gym sessions throughout the week.
Exactly, 100%.
Right, and that's where I see Neuroflow's benefit is sort of amplifying in a very real way the work in therapy, which will actually mean that treatment progress will increase sooner, and so you won't have to see me or see the therapist as long. If you're, again, going back to the physical, if you only do the physical therapy exercises at the physical therapist's office when you go there, then you're going to be seeing them 2-3 times longer than if you actually apply your physio exercises at the house or what have you. And so I see that that's a huge benefit to really making things, getting things a lot sooner. Have you seen a good response with that?
Yeah, I mean, things that, so yes, long story short is it's been very encouraging. We've we're still an early and a young company. We've been in clinics in the market for just a little over a year now. We did a lot of research in conjunction with the University of Pennsylvania, and now you mentioned that we're launching in the VA, which was funded by the National Science Foundation. But just in the short term, in a year, we're launched in 120 clinics and hospitals with thousands of patients. And if you look at the standard of care statistics, if I was just to come to see you for therapy and you were to have me do my CBT exercises, depending on the severity and the demographic of the person and the disorder type, we would expect a range of compliance with my exercises from 10 to 50%. So best case scenario, we would expect me to do my homework and my exercises half the time. Worst case, we'd expect me to do it maybe one in 10 times. And so, obviously, even the best case isn't that good. So, with Neuroflow, we've seen with the thousands of patients that we have on it now, and over 100 clinics and hospitals, we're averaging a compliance rate from 60 to 70%. So substantially higher than the standard of care, even in the best case. And frankly, I say that with a lot of humility, because while it's better than the standard of care today, it's still nowhere near where we want to be. So while I think it's a step in the right direction and we're really happy and hopeful about that progress, there's still a lot of work to be done. It's why that we're working with the providers, we're working with the patients to get their feedback in terms of what worked, what they liked, what they didn't, so we could create a really more robust and comprehensive platform, and hopefully see those engagement numbers much, much higher than even where they are today in the next year or so.
Right, and that's some really encouraging, especially for being as young as you are, right? As you said, you've only been operating for just over a year or so, but the college ball player knows that they're getting somewhere whenever the major league scouts start to come to the games. And the fact that that the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is rightly so notorious for making sure they're not early adopters, right? They don't take a flyer on just the next biggest thing. They thoroughly do their research, and to be able to partner with a VA clinic to be able to see what these benefits are, that's pretty significant, especially for any company, but for a young company.
Yeah, I mean, you're very. That was very well said. To be clear, I mean, we are a young company. I mean, I think even the Ubers of the world are. I mean, frankly, in the large scheme of things, even Google's a young company. If you look at if compared to the Johnsons and Johnsons of the world, or the steel companies of the world, but we've been in market for a year. The company's been around for actually about 2.5 years. The first year and a half of that was a lot of research, talking to hundreds and hundreds of clinicians and patients to get their feedback in terms of what is their actual problem here, what can we do. So basically, we didn't want to take the field of dreams approach, just build it and they will come, especially not coming from a healthcare or mental health background myself. I really wanted to learn what their problem was from them themselves, so that we can help build a product that was customized for their workflow, and that was also clinically valid. So in Neuroflow's suite of tools, we have mobile applications that patients can use that are on iOS and Android, but it's not a direct-to-consumer model. Anyone can go on the App Store and download it, but they won't be able to log into it unless they're invited by either a medical provider or a behavioral health specialist. And the thought there is that this really is a clinical tool. It's a decision support tool and an engagement tool. And so that's why we took about 18 months to do a lot of research, a lot of product development, a lot of user testing before we launched in the market. And I think that's in part why you're seeing the encouraging results so early on.
Right, and and we have a variety of different listeners here on the show. Some of them are clinicians, of course, mental health professionals who are working with veterans, those professionals who served and those who didn't. But also we have a number of veterans who, just veterans who are listening to the show, and they'd be like, well, why am I listening to this if I can't access it? Some of it is to show that you, as a field artillery officer, has decided to not continue to perpetuate the silence, but actually engage in mental health. But also to show that there's different ways to get to this place of wellness, right? That it's not just sitting on the couch talking to somebody, it's actually using technology. One of the striking things, there was, and I talk about it often because I think it was such a striking report, was the National Academy's report at the beginning of the year that showed over 50% of post 9/11 veterans are comfortable or getting more comfortable accessing mental health through digital means. Again, like you said, through the app or things like that. And you're leveraging that comfortability with technology to be able to promote wellness.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, yes, thank you for clarifying that. And the what's really exciting is, so right now we're a clinical tool, and like I said, you have to be invited by a provider or behavioral health specialist to use this. We've been getting a lot of feedback and have been working directly with clinicians to design and launch a what I would call a self-service app. We're going to call it Empower, and it's going to launch in 2019. We're not sure exactly when yet, but Empower will be able to be downloaded by a service member or by a patient that wants to engage with these mental health resources and tools without a provider. But what will be unique about it is, if in the course of doing that, if you're getting feedback from the app that suggests maybe you would benefit from seeing a behavioral health specialist or going to therapy or CBT, that if you were to then engage with a provider, they can have a more holistic context of how your self-service in the app has been going, so that they can deliver more, a more precise care for you right from the get-go, as opposed to, and therefore saving time, saving therapy to hopefully get you out of therapy sooner and be more effective in care, both from the provider standpoint and the patient standpoint. So anyway, long story short is, stay tuned in 2019. Dwayne, I'll definitely keep you updated on it for when that patient-facing side, the self-service app with a lot of these mental health tools will be available.
See, and that's another, again, through that same study, was that where they screened over 4,000 veterans, and 51% of those veterans screened positive for some form of mental health concern, depression, anxiety, as you mentioned, post-traumatic stress, substance use disorder. But half of those that screened positive didn't even realize they had a problem. And so the Empower platform sounds like it's one way to bring that awareness, right? I don't know that I got spinach in my teeth until I look into the mirror and see it, or somebody tells me, hey, you got spinach in your teeth. That's a difference between, I don't see often, many veterans don't see that there's an issue until a crisis happens, and either they realize it or someone else, a spouse or maybe the police, right, or whoever, will be telling them, hey, there's something wrong here. And so the idea of being able to bring this to your attention, maybe somebody will log in and say, I think I'm not doing well, but then, the feedback may, no, you're actually doing pretty good. It's not that bad, and this is actually normal, and it may be, just a little bit more time outside or whatever it is. And so it's able to differentiate between those that, things aren't quite as bad versus, things are not nearly as good as they could possibly be. And so it's all about raising awareness and then driving that awareness to action.
Yeah, a lot of the tools that we have built in are, related to those evidence-based therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, and so it will help someone walk through exercises like reframing exercises, reframing thoughts, and and helping them to not catastrophize certain instances that will help someone go through a thought process is saying like, okay, maybe this isn't as bad as I initially thought it was. We can talk through, we can work through various different solutions that we can work through, and that is a common symptom and struggle that people that struggle with anxiety have, right? Catastrophizing sort of thing, and so, I mean, look, the whole goal for us, especially from an awareness standpoint, is that one, there's nothing. I know a lot of people say this all the time, but there truly is nothing to be ashamed about when you have these, when you struggle with anxiety or when you're feeling depressed. But moreover, and the most tragic thing is that these different struggles and these illnesses don't have to be life sentences. They don't have to last forever. You don't have to always struggle with them. Now, it may take work in truly getting better, but there's evidence-based therapies, and there's a ton of dedicated professionals like yourself, Dwayne, that are committed to getting patients to feel better and to develop a certain level of resiliency in there, so that they're better off for it, they're happier for it, they're more productive because of it, and that this doesn't have to be a situation where for the rest of their life they're going to wake up feeling depressed and they have to do so in secrecy because they're ashamed by it.
Right, and I appreciate you bringing that out, and not even therapy is this long-term thing, right? And I often say that, if I'm still working with somebody after 8 months and things haven't shifted, then maybe I'm not doing my job quite as well as I should be. Even being in therapy isn't a long-term thing, or even looking at, some medications. Yes, of course, there are some medications where you're going to have to be on that medication in perpetuity. Bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, two of the significant ones, but that's because those are biologically based, and just like someone with diabetes is going to have to be on insulin. But then if someone is taking antidepressants and working with a therapist at the same time, there's a period of time where you don't have to be on antidepressants forever. It's after a while your brain is going to change and the chemicals are going to rebalance and you start tapering off, and then you don't need those things anymore. And I think a lot of people will think that it is a long-term sort of, once I start down this path, that there's no way for me to get to the not path. And it's really important to understand that it's actually going to be longer for you to recover if you don't get the treatment than if you get the treatment.
Yeah, there's, not to get technically or too technical with the terms and the nomenclature, but I think, well, at least as far as the insurance reimbursement codes and the Center for Medicaid and Medicare are concerned, they delineate what you just described as serious and persistent mental illness and non-serious and persistent mental illness. And so those are the biological, bipolar, and that sort of thing versus anxiety and depression and so SPMI and non-SPMI. They both, the good news is that they both have evidence-based ways and different either medications or treatments or therapies that can help with either of them. And then the non-SPMI is exactly what you said, where you can work through therapy and to rebalance the brain and make yourself more resilient, so that you're not struggling with depression and anxiety in perpetuity.
Right, and using the term non-serious and persistent, it's sort of like mild TBI, right? How is there such a thing? But that's a medical designation, right? That's a designation that comes from the clinical field. Depression and anxiety are significantly serious, and of course leading to the ultimate critical outcome of suicide. But even then, just the issues of life satisfaction and disrupted relationships and employment, so that's serious and persistent. It can be serious and persistent if you don't seek treatment for it.
Thank you for clarifying. That's very well said, and I guess what's the hopeful piece of it is that, not to beat a dead horse, but as we're saying, I mean, there's the professionals like yourself have years and years of training and experience to deliver evidence-based therapy that doesn't have to be a forever thing. If done correctly, if engaged properly, if motivated by the patient, it's a two-way street. You could only do so much for that patient. That patient has to put some work in as well, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, there definitely is. I'd like to get into, I can imagine, people are listening to this conversation and say, okay, this is nice, but then, what is Neuroflow? And Neuroflow, it's a combination. It's a web-based platform, but specifically you had mentioned wearables. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about how wearables, my Fitbit or the Apple Watch or whatever, how these integrate into the Neuroflow system and enable an individual to sort of, track their progress, because that kind of stuff is pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, going back to taking a step back, when someone engages in a mindfulness exercise, or maybe on the converse side of things, an exposure exercise. So, exposure therapy is a validated and evidence-based therapy to treat PTSD in a lot of cases. When you're exposed to something that might trigger a symptom, or when you engage in mindfulness and get into a more relaxed meditative state, your body changes physiologically in both of those instances. And what I mean by your body changes, just like if you get hot, you sweat, your heart rate may go up. When you work out, your heart rate goes up. When you get aroused, your pupils dilate. I mean, your body changes when certain emotions occur. And so when you are stressed, or when you are anxious, or vice versa, when you're relaxed and meditated, your heart rate and your brain change, and in fairly precise ways. We know that through research. So, and when I say heart rate, I really am referring to heart rate variability. So not just the beats per minute, not just going from 70 beats a minute to 90 beats a minute. That change can occur just because you went for a 2-mile run or something like that. It's the time in between each beat and the variance of that time in between each beat. So is it more consistent, or is it less consistent? And that measurement is a high correlate to emotional state, to relaxed state versus an anxious, amped up state. Likewise, your brain produces a variety of different wavelengths. So your brain produces alpha waves, beta waves, theta, gamma, and delta waves. And your prefrontal cortex, which is the front of your brain, it's the brain part of your brain that's just behind your forehead, is where your emotions are regulated. And so if we can, using wearable devices, there's a lot of cool Bluetooth, wireless, wearable EEG headsets out there in the market. One of the ones that we are compatible with, we partnered with, is called the Muse, M-U-S-E. And you could take the Muse, and it looks like something out of Star Trek a little bit. It's very futuristic, but it looks like just a headband. It's very lean, and I think it retails for $200, so not the cheapest thing, but certainly not the most expensive. And using that, we can measure the waves that your brain produces from the prefrontal cortex, and we can correlate those to the emotional state. So when whether you're anxious or stressed or relaxed, your body produces more or less of alpha waves. And so if we can measure that, we can show objectively and empirically, kind of how stressed relaxed you are in that moment in real time. We can do the same thing with heart rate and heart rate variability measurements using the whatever heart rate monitor, as long as it can get HRV from it. And we take it even a step further now, because we understand a lot of people don't have these wearables, or someone doesn't have the means to get a $200 EEG headset. So can you still benefit from these wearables and from measuring your physiological heart rate? And our engineering team, we have some of the best data scientists in the world, some of the best engineers in the world, have built a tool and an algorithm that pairs with a smartphone device. So as long as you have a smartphone, Android or iOS, and that phone has a camera with a flash on it, you can use the camera and the flash to get heart rate variability. Now, there are other apps out there that do, you could do that and just get, see your heartbeat. But we apply our algorithms that have been validated with the University of Pennsylvania and their neuroscience department in correlating that and showing stress and energy level. So, it just takes a 90-second reading via the phone. I do this twice a day. I do one in the morning when I first show up at the office, and I do one at night when I'm trying to wind down. And it's a breathing exercise. So on the app, you'll see this this screen, this breathing guide, kind of inflate and then deflate. And I could play a mindfulness session along with doing that if I wanted to. And while doing that, I'm also have my finger on the phone, flash and camera, and I'm measuring my stress and my energy level with my biometrics, with my physiology, so I could objectively see how my body's reacting. And I do that because now I could track over time how, over the course of a week, how I was progressing and that sort of thing. So that's in the platform and on the application. And what's really neat about that is that if you were my therapist, Wayne, and I was doing that in between appointments with you, you can see that, we could interact remotely, and you could kind of track my progress and see how I'm doing in between appointments. Or the next time I would come in for my hour-long session, we can review my charts and say, like, wow, look, you've been really improving over the last week. Good job. And it's a way to stay engaged and motivated with the therapy.
No, I can see the benefit to that. I've had clients come in to be able to say, hey, this happened on Saturday, but it didn't bother me as much because I knew I was coming in to see you on Tuesday, right? It was something that I was able to file away, and I'm going to see my guy and what have you. And so this is even another way if we wake up one morning after a nightmare, let's say, and I have a elevated heart rate and all this other thing, that I could even then to myself say, okay, got it, file that away, and that's something that I'm going to talk about with my clinician when I see them, whenever, right? And so that's even another benefit that I see from the clinical standpoint. But even the physical integration, right? You're talking about when our emotions come, that we have this physical response. And every veteran who's experienced maybe a reaction to a trigger or something, that hair stands up in the back of your neck, and your palms get sweaty and your mouth gets dry, and all of these different things happen. And anything that happens can be measured and it can be communicated. And then we can control that, right? If it's brought to our attention, as you said, the prefrontal cortex. If our emotions are just running wild and we don't, and we're just, freaking out, let's say, for a lack of a scientific term, then we're not controlling anything. But the minute that we, look at our, Fitbit or Apple Watch or whatever, and then start doing that relaxed breathing exercise and focus on calming ourselves down, that's when we engage the front part of our brain. And the more we engage the front part of our brain, the greater our emotional control. And it is truly an integration between the psychological and the physical.
Absolutely. And you're getting at the crux of what we believe at Neuroflow, and I mean, frankly, it's not even what we believe. It's backed up by decades of evidence before us. We're just trying to put a digital and a technological spin on it so that we can make these things accessible to everyone remotely, whether they're at home, at their work, at their kid's soccer game, so that we can extend the power of the therapy with you and the benefit of that to their everyday life, to the other 99% of the time that they're not in that hour-long session with a specialist.
Right, and then I definitely see, and you had mentioned it earlier, the fact that this isn't just a veteran issue, that it is a wider issue, the mental health piece. But I'm a firm believer of, as veterans go, so go our nation, and solutions. If we can, solve the very tangled problem of stigma against help seeking, which is very prevalent in the military space, as well as access to care, which is also challenging for service members. That if we can solve those in the veteran space, we can then turn around and apply those to mental health at large. And so it sounds great what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Like I said, I think it's been an exciting 2.5 years to be part of the company and founding it a few years ago, and it's been an exciting year now to finally be in the clinic and to have the hair on the back of my neck stands up in a good way when a doctor calls us and says that this is really truly changing and helping the way I'm able to treat the whole person, not just their physical health. And when we have a patient give us a review on the App Store or email us to just thank us and say, like, I've never had this sort of resource or this sense of help before, it's what motivates us to get to work every day. But there is so much more work to be done. I said it earlier, and I mean, if we can't do it alone. This problem is big enough, and it's audacious enough where it's only going to be solved if everyone has a part in that solution, and if everyone is motivated and is a believer in either helping the people that you love and are close to inspire them to get the help that they need and to be a resource to them. And if you yourself are struggling understanding that, it doesn't have to be that way. Together, I think, as a community, both as veterans and just as humans and Americans, we can really start to make a big impact.
Right, and then it comes back to what you said before: is we can build the biggest state-of-the-art facility in the world, and we can bring in all of the most effective technology that science shows works and helps and increases wellness. But until that person steps out and says, I'm going to get that help, or I'm actually going to engage in this, until people start showing up, then the effectiveness is going to be limited. And definitely you and the team at Neuroflow have definitely stepped up. And so that's appreciative on my part personally, but I think it's great. So if somebody wants to learn more about Neuroflow or maybe connect with you specifically, how would they do that?
Yeah, that's easy. So our website is neuroflowsolution.com. It's NEUROFLOW solution.com. And all our contact information stuff's on that website. You can find out more about the program. If you're a clinician listening to this and it's something that you might be interested in, we have, again, the platform for behavioral health specialists and the integrated health platform, which is for a medical provider, someone that could prescribe medication, and there's actually reimbursements tied to that. And then if you're a patient and you're saying, well, this is something that is interesting and I'd like to try to engage with this, especially there's, we didn't get into this, Wayne, but there's reward mechanisms. Actually, you could get gift cards and stuff like that for doing your exercises. So if you're a patient, you're saying, this is something I want to try and I want to do with my clinician, there's a way for you to refer your provider to us so that we can give them free access or discounted access to it, or you could just introduce it to them yourselves, and we would love to have a discussion with them and with you about that. So neuroflowsolution.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Those URLs are Neuroflow Live. That's Neuroflow and then LIVE. And listen, I love getting contacted by anyone that's also passionate about the mental health space, clinicians, patients, family members. It doesn't matter. Like I said, this is a team effort. We're in this together. So I welcome anyone to please reach out and find us.
That's great. And I'm going to make sure that all of those links, both to the website and then the social media contacts, and make sure that those are in the show notes. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today, Chris.
Thanks, Dwayne. And thanks for everything that you do. I know for both the veteran and the mental health community, you're really making a difference. Thanks for having me on the show today.
You're listening to Headspace and Timing on the Change Your POV Podcast Network. Great conversation. I mentioned it briefly in the show, but I think Chris is a great example of someone who didn't follow a traditional path in getting out of the military. He also shows that you don't have to be a mental health professional to make an impact on veteran mental health. We also talk about it briefly in this episode, but a Forbes article at the end of October talks about how Christopher and his company was awarded a small business technology transfer grant from the National Science Foundation. In that article, Chris is quoted as saying, "This is a huge opportunity to demonstrate how technology and remote monitoring capabilities can enhance the way providers integrate and collaborate on behavioral health care in an evidence-based fashion." This is not technology that replaces mental health counseling, but it is something that enhances it. It leverages technology to help build awareness about our ability to control our own mind and body, and helps partner with the professional we're working with to help us get to where we need that much faster. This pilot program is going to be rolling out at the Corporal Michael J. Krasin's VA Medical Center in Philadelphia. If you want to find out more, make sure to head over to neuroflowsolutions.com. Thanks again for taking the time to listen to this conversation. You can find the show notes for this episode and all the episodes at veteranmentalhealth.com. Make sure to join us next week when we talk to another friend and colleague of mine, Anne Marie Craig, about her organization, the Commit Foundation. Their goal is to change the way that veterans and communities think about transition, just like my goal is to change the way that we all think about veteran mental health. Make sure to tune in so you don't miss it, and until then, stay focused and be well. I'd like to thank the Change Your POV Podcast Network for hosting this show and highlighting the critical importance of veteran mental health. We want to hear from you. You can reach out to me via email at dwayne@veteranmentalhealth.com. You can find me at Twitter at @TheCounselingVet, or head on over to Facebook and look for the Change Your POV Squad. You can find the show notes for this episode and all the episodes by going to veteranmentalhealth.com or changeyourpov.com. Sign up for updates on either or both so you don't miss another episode. While you're at it, check out the other great shows on the Change Your POV Podcast Network. The show about remembering our military history and reviving our warrior spirit, Changing Hearts and Minds. The show about outdoor activities that us veterans love so much, Neophyte in the Woods. The show that helps us get going at the beginning of the week, Motivation Monday. And Attack Fridays, the show that brings you actionable tips, tricks, and coachable knowledge to help you make the best of your transition. While you're checking out the other shows, drop us a review in iTunes or whatever podcast platform you're listening to. The reviews really help spread the word about what we're doing. If you're looking for the total package for all the information you need to live the life you want after leaving the military, you found it. If you know of a buddy who's looking for the same info, share it with them so they can find it too. I want to thank Doc Todd for his permission to use his track Not Alone from his amazing album Combat Medicine. Doc Todd is somebody who's trying to bring veteran mental health out of the darkness and into the light, and you can get the album by going to therealdoctodd.com. Check it out. Because remember, veterans, you're not alone. Ever.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stones. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies, broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic tendency, embrace my ability.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please let me the strength to carry on and keep
Stand up.
How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I hurt each time I wait,
Tell 'em, man.
but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, get myself back up again.
Without my Georgia girls, yeah, I'd probably be dead. Cause I'd be taking every med that the VA said. Gave every shred, every last thread of my identity. Conquer my fragility, eliminate the enemy. Deliver me, God, from temptation. Tell me that this life is just a matrix. Need a facelift, back to basics. Vision LASIX, I only feel alive when I hear the bass kick.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray.
Keep praying.
Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep standing.
Stand up.
How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I hurt each time I wait, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. Yeah. You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall,
Come
I'ma
on.
call on you, pick myself back up again.
Yeah, just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone, man. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Yeah, pick up the phone, I'm right here. And I love you guys. Take those bottles out, dog, and pour them in the sink. Take the needles out your arm and the gun away from your forehead. It's time, man, you've been through enough pain, stand up. It's time to stand back up. All my veterans, man, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Get up, you know.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith.